All right, so today let's talk about a couple things. We're going to start with sheer or twill type fabric where you can see through it, where it's transparent. Who's translating today?
Hôm nay mình thì bạn sẽ nói về cái loại vải mà mình qua đấy.
Nó không phải là xuyên thấu như là glass, nó là các bạn hay dùng như vừa nãy nói là xuyên thấu, còn cái vải này hay cái giống của nó là vải sheer.
Đúng vậy, mình coi được không phải là thế, đúng không? Đúng.
So essentially these fabrics, you can see through them because of the way that they're stitched together. The material at the very small level, the almost microscopic level, there's essentially a bunch of little holes in it, right? So that's what we need to do. We need to create a proper map for the opacity channel.
Đúng, chắc là vải này bởi vì mình có thể nhìn qua được là do cái cấu trúc của loại vải rất là nhỏ, và khi mà chui vào đến cái mức mà gọi là vi mô ấy, thì nó có rất là nhiều lỗ nên mình xuyên qua được. Thì cái này chính là cái mà mình sẽ áp dụng để mà mình tạo ra cái opacity map.
So just to get the basic idea, usually when you look at this kind of fabric, as it moves away in the grazing angle, it looks like it's not transparent, but then when it's flat and you're looking directly at it, it is transparent. We can see through it. So we could use the same technique that we use with cotton and use a fall off.
Đối với cái loại vải này thì mình thấy thường xuyên là ở những cái rất là nếp nhăn hay là những cái lúc mà nó sát vào nhau hơn thì mình sẽ không nhìn qua được nó. Thì cái kiểu nó stretch out, nó giãn ra thì mình nhìn qua được. Thì đây là cái đặc điểm mà mình có thể dựa vào đấy để mình làm, và cách làm là dùng cái phô lọc khi mà áp dụng với cái pattern hôm qua mình đã học.
So this scene's pretty basic. It's just a curtain and a teapot behind it. If I apply this material to the curtain, we will see that it's just a typical V-Ray shader. We can't see through it or anything. As soon as we drop a fall off into the opacity channel, when we're looking directly at it, we can see through it, but as it rolls away from us, it becomes like more opaque. We can actually have some sort of resistance where it starts to give us this effect that we're seeing here.
Trong trường hợp này lúc đầu khi mà chỉ có cái apply cái material vào cái rèn thôi thì mình chưa nhìn qua được. Tuy nhiên khi mà ngay lập tức khi mình bắt cái mask opacity vào, bắt cái pull off này vào cái opacity thì mình sẽ nhìn xuyên qua được. Cái này là khi cái basic của nó là đối với khi mà mình nhìn thẳng thì giống như là cái pull off hôm qua, khi mà nhìn thẳng thì nó sẽ mờ và nó nhìn xuyên qua được. Còn khi mà cái nó bị cong, nó bị khâu lại thì mình sẽ không nhìn thấy nữa, là do cái chiều nhìn của mình.
Just like our fabrics, we want to adjust the curve so that it only affects it in certain areas.
Cũng giống như là cái vải trong thì mình sẽ cần phải muốn thay đổi cái curve này để mà cho cái độ chỉ xuất hiện ở một số đối điểm của mình thôi.
Obviously, the more drastic we make the curve, the tighter that gradient will be, and we will see a lot more directly through it when we're looking at it, and then as it rolls away, it will become tighter, and we will obviously see, like, not see through it as much, and it'll become more opaque.
Chính vậy sẽ là chỉ cái này mà khi mà càng cong xuống dưới thì mình sẽ càng nhìn xuyên qua nó, còn nếu chỉ một bên trên thì mình sẽ bớt cái khả năng nhìn xuyên qua.
Now this by itself, it's a good starting point, but we need some sort of texture to break it up so that it's not invisible when we're looking at it. So that's where we need to use a texture map of some sort, but it's going to be more of a pattern.
Cái này thì bắt đầu nó là cái bước khởi đầu khá là ổn rồi, mình đã nhìn xuyên qua được nó. Tuy nhiên mình cần phải cho tạo thêm cái texture cho cái này nhìn cho nó thật, và ở đây là sẽ có cái pattern.
So I'm going to go into Photoshop instead of looking around since I know exactly what I need. I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to create a small pattern, a small file, because it's going to repeat a lot. So I don't need to, I just need to create a couple repeats within the actual texture itself. We can go really small, but 256 is like a good area to start.
Bây giờ bạn đi làm trong Photoshop và bạn sẽ không cần phải làm một cái file texture nó quá to. 256 hay 256 là ổn rồi. Bởi vì cái pattern này sẽ tự động nó làm lại rất là nhiều lần, mình không cần phải tạo cái file mà đã làm sẵn trong đấy nữa.
There's a number of patterns that we could do. We could do a very simple polka dot style pattern. All we need to do is create a black and white map. So I'm going to put one in the direct center. And with snaps, it makes it really easy to create a pattern where this repeats in the corners. If I hit, right now I want to create the inverse of this, but I can do that once I actually create the pattern, because I want the dots to be white and this to be black in some cases. So we can always invert either before we save the texture out, or we could always invert and max. You're going to want to select all by either hitting Control A or just select and then all, and then go to image. Actually, what is it? I forget where it is now. Define pattern. Under edit, define pattern. I'll name this dots. And now I can create a new file, a little bit of a larger file. And I can create a new layer, fill. Pick my dots, and now we have a polka dot texture. For this, for this specific one, I'd prefer to use something like this, more of a square pattern. For this one, all you have to do is create a bunch of lines. I'll just do it again real quick. It's pretty basic. It's just a matter of hiding those dots. Creating a line with whatever thickness you want. For this example, 10 seemed to work well for me. Snap it so that the middle is on each edge. And I'm just holding Alt and dragging to duplicate these. And then I want to just drag in between those two. And again, with snaps, it allows me to drop this right in between each set. I can select all of those and duplicate. And then turn them. Make sure they're positioned properly. And set them all to multiply. If we lower the opacity slightly, we'll get this nice little overlay where it'll actually create that bump up where they crosshatch on top of each other like fabric would. So once we take that and we drop it into our file here, this is the same thing. I duplicated it, created an invert of it, and then this is for the bump. I want to create a little bit of a gradient around the edges. So if I do an inner glow, we get something like this, where we get the gradient along the edges and then add a little bit of noise. And that way the bump won't be so perfectly cutting off, and it'll give it a little bit of a texture. So let's bring these textures into Max. My bump, my transparency. I'm going to want to drag this one into map channel 1. And now we start to see our weave. We need to tile it a good amount. I found 30 in this case worked pretty well. We can also drag it into map channel 2 and just make it so that the white affects it more. So like 50%, and it gives us this nice little touch of light along the edges. Now you can start to see it a little bit in certain areas. If we adjust the blur, let me just zoom in a little bit more. Okay. If we adjust the blur of our map to be 0, it will make it nice and sharp, and you'll actually start to see the texture of it. If this is too much of an effect, you can either increase the tiling or just lower this amount again. So if I go 0.1 instead of 0.01, we'll still get that touch of fabric look, but it won't be as strong as 0.01. So now let's drag in our bump map. It's going to be a very subtle effect, and it may not always be necessary, but at least it'll give it a little bit of texture when the light catches it. I'm going to lower the blur on this one as well so that the texture map doesn't get filtered. I'm duplicating my fall off because I want the same kind of fall off effect for my color. And at this point you can use a fabric texture, or you can use just a basic color in this instance. It actually works pretty well. Just like we talked about the other day, I have my blue plugged into both channels, and I just have it so that the white affects it subtly. If we zoom back out, we're getting pretty close to what this looks like. Now, if we want to make it so that you can't see through it as much, you can easily adjust the amount that the opacity map is affecting this. If I lower this down to 50, oops, wrong one. Wrong number. If we lower this down to 50, it'll become more opaque. If we go to 0, it will be completely opaque. For our basic sheer curtain, where it's 2 layers, where it's the main curtain in the back and then this in front, this is a really easy way to capture that. We don't need 2-sided in this instance because it gives us that natural light effect already. There's no need for a 2-sided material. It's only going to add to render time. Any questions on this specifically? Straightforward, makes sense? All right. Again, like I don't think I need to plug it in, but the dots would do a very similar effect. It's just kind of a different pattern. It's good to look up the pattern that you're trying to create and see how each different opacity map works. All right. The next thing we're going to talk about is stitching. How many of you use geometry for stitching?